lead out tonight with a question. How many weeks, days, hours need to pass before we start fighting in earnest for our democracy? And I mean really putting up a fight, making noise and giving it the urgency its fragile position deserves. And I ask because we are already past the point of hand-wringing. And bipartisanship, yeah, that fantasy ship has sailed. We, right now, tonight, are at the point where the big lie is positioned to hijack our democracy by 2022. With Trump emerging, albeit with wrinkled thighs, a incoherent mind, and maybe even an adult diaper, back on the campaign trail, under the banner of Stop the Steal, with his partisans having positioned themselves in state governments and in the United States Congress to help him pull off in 2024 what he and the January 6th insurrectionists tried, stealing the election. Stop the Steal is the insurrectionist Republicans' banner. Democrats, what's yours? Because seriously, there are plenty of folks who are terrified by what we're seeing and frankly baffled by the Democrats' weirdly cordial response. You'd think in the face of actual autocracy that things would feel a little more hands-on. And it isn't just me or my friends who are saying this. People who are famous for their conservative beliefs and who have devoted their entire careers to promoting democracy abroad, including in some ways I personally have opposed in the past, they are saying it too. People like Max Boot and Jennifer Rubin and David Frum are out here sending out SOS calls saying, America, wake up, because their former political party is about to steal our democracy right out from under our noses. We've got democracy scholars, 100 of them, signing a public statement saying that American democracy is in grave danger and that suspending the filibuster to pass voting rights is vital to ensuring that we continue to be a democratic republic. And if that's not enough, listen to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in an interview from 1963, raising the same alarms when senators back then were dithering on passing federal legislation to protect civil rights and voting rights.
The tragedy is that we have a Congress with a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting. They won't let the majority of senators vote. And certainly they wouldn't want the majority of people to vote because they know they do not represent the majority of the American people. In fact, they represent in their own states a very small minority.
Did you hear that? That was 58 years ago. And we defied the odds because eventually the filibusters failed. And after 2 more years of struggle and racist violence, we finally got a Voting Rights Act. And yet now we're reliving the past, verbatim. Who else needs to say it for Democratic leaders to proclaim that this is a state of emergency? You can't say that you weren't warned. Enter West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who this weekend officially crushed any chance that we can save voting rights at the federal level ahead of the 2022 election.
You know, voting is the bedrock of our democracy. An open, fair, secured voting. We used to go around the world and explain and show and observe voting procedures in a democracy. And now if we can't practice what we preach, and we're going to basically do an overhaul, an 800-page overhaul of the voting rights, or what we call For the People Act. I think there's a lot of great things. I agree in that piece of legislation, but there's an awful lot of things that basically don't pertain directly to voting.
Well, we sent Manchin's office a list of questions to find out what he specifically objects to in the For the People Act, and if he agreed that our democracy is in danger. His office has not responded. Joining me now is Nancy McLean, historian and author of Democracy in Chains. And Nancy, thank you for being here. I interviewed you for my book, as a matter of fact, because I read Democracy in Chains. It scared the hell out of me. But as we say on this show, scaring is caring. I think it's important for people to be real. That last thing that Joe Manchin said about, well, you know, you can't pass a bill without bipartisan support that changes our democracy. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution, 33 Republicans voted in favor, 0 Democrats voted in favor. The 15th Amendment to the Constitution, 39 in favor, 0 Democrats in favor, because those were the bills that essentially gave citizenship and voting rights to the formerly enslaved. No Democrats voted for that. They were the conservative party at the time. The Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, again, 36 in favor. They were all Republicans, 0 Democrats in favor. None of those are bipartisan. As an historian, What do you make of Joe Manchin's claim there?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, he is really living in a past that doesn't exist anymore. It would be lovely to have bipartisanship, but this Republican Party has shown us for certainly over the last decade that they will do nothing in a bipartisan way. I think the problem is that Senator Manchin, and unfortunately, I think some other Democratic elected officials, really have not fully come to grips with the fact that there is no more Republican Party in the way that people understood that party, that many people voted for it for the years as a normal major party in our system. What has happened is that the major arch-right donors, most famously the Koch network, have so transformed the party and have so brought it to heel with their agenda, partly through putting in dark money to elections and rewarding those who comply and penalizing those who don't, and also by arousing the Republican base voters with a steady diet of identity agitation, of misinformation, et cetera. And so, there is the constant barrage of noise, and I think he needs some of his colleagues to go and walk him through connecting the dots, that this is not an isolated instance. On measure after measure, we now have two ideological parties, but every political scientist and scholar who studies this will tell you that the Republicans are the most polarized, the most extreme, the most resistant to factual evidence, and that they will not cooperate on anything. They have shown that most dramatically with their refusal to support an investigation into the most serious attack on our Capitol since the Civil War. Now, a party that will not do that, a party that has shown in state after state and nationally that they believe the only way they can win now is to suppress the vote, a party like that is not going to vote for any kind of voting rights. So he's living in a dream world that no longer exists.
Exactly, and none of them are going to vote for the John Lewis. You can call that thing John Lewis and Dr. Martin Luther King Act. None of them are voting for it, Joe Manchin. Right. But I want you touched on something I think is very important. Manchin said that he doesn't support everything in the bill. He wouldn't tell us on this show what it is he doesn't support. But I suspect the parts that he doesn't support, and that Kristen Sinema and some of the others don't support, are the stuff the Chamber of Commerce doesn't like. The Chamber of Commerce is supportive of both Manchin and Sinema and some other Democrats, these Chamber of Commerce Democrats. And you talked about the Koch brothers. There was a great piece in the New Yorker about how the Koch brothers have gone all out to stop this bill, to stop the For the People Act. Not just because they don't like voting rights. And you can explain to us why these super rich, mega rich people don't like people to vote, but they also don't like the end of dark money. Dark money is in this bill too. Explain what these super rich people really want.
What these super rich people really want is something so frightening that they understandably do not ask for it by name, but instead they have operated by stealth for years now, steadily rigging the rules of our democracy until we are at the point now where I think about it almost as a noose. There are so many threads in the noose on our democracy now that it's almost impossible to count them. You can start with the destruction of collective bargaining power for public sector employees begun by Scott Walker in 2011, move on to the voter suppression bills that, there were 180 of them in 2013, the worst gerrymander that we've ever seen in our political history, the most sophisticated gerrymander that enabled this Project Red Map to take control of over 30 state capitals, and the court effort to use dark money to get Supreme Court justices confirmed, like Brett Kavanaugh, like Amy Coney Barrett, like John Roberts. All of this has been extremely coordinated on the right. It's part of a very, very interwoven long-term strategy. And until we understand that strategy, we're shadowboxing. Because we cannot look at any of these issues in isolation, whether it's the voter suppression or the attempts to make it so that state legislatures can count the vote however they choose, or the efforts to undermine the independent judiciary in states like my North Carolina. All of these things are part of an integrated strategy that is slowly shackling and strangling democracy. And we need figures like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema to understand that that's how much is at stake. I will say people should be aware, too, that the Koch-backed right is up in Joe Manchin's grill in his home state. Right?
100%.
Prosperity is organizing, Heritage busting people from surrounding states, running constant ads. So they are really going after him and Kristen Sinema to try to make sure that they don't support Democratic priorities.
There you go. And that is the piece that I needed people to understand. And that is why I wanted to talk to you. Nancy MacLean, thank you very much. Read Democracy in Chains, y'all.